The United Nations is appealing for nearly $900 million to help Rohingya who fled to Bangladesh from their native Myanmar. So, how will the international community respond? And can the Rohingya ever hope for an end to the stateless limbo they're trapped in? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. We're taking a further look at the plight of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The UN Refugee Agency has launched an urgent international appeal for vital aid to help them. Some call it a forgotten crisis, yet the conditions for about 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh remain as grim as ever. They fled from Myanmar after the military there began its crackdown in 2017, which the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. On Sunday, a huge fire burned thousands of their makeshift homes, worsening an already dire situation. 12,000 refugees have now lost their shelter. Before we bring in our panel, let's first speak to Yasin in Coxs Bazaar. He's a photojournalist and a Rohingya refugee for the past 6 years. Yasin, thanks for being with us. I'm so glad to hear that you and your family are all safe. This latest fire happened on Sunday. You've been documenting what's been going on in the camp since then. What is the situation like for all the refugees who lost their shelters in that devastating fire?
Hi, this is Yasin. I am a Rohingya refugee living in the world's largest refugee camp. So, as a refugee, I have been documenting the life of refugee almost 6 years. Now, the recent fire I saw with my own eyes, that was, a disastrous, massive fire for the refugees. So, now it has been 2 days. I have been, documenting the life of the refugee of the fire disaster. So now the situation of the refugees is very, vulnerable. So because most of the refugees, almost 200 shelters were burned down. Also, most of the refugees from those shelters got displaced. So there is no food for them. There is no clothes. There is no family utensil. There is no shelters. They like bamboos and tarpaulin to make their shelters rebuilt now, because most of the refugees just in a nightmare of the fire, because everybody was just afraid of the fire before it has been, many times, 3 or 4 times the people are suffering, facing this kind of challenges, especially about the fire in the camp. This time, this is really a horrible situation for them because they lost everything except their lives.
Yasin, let me also ask you about the situation in the camps when it comes to the food vouchers. The UN has been trying to raise more money for the Rohingya response. They've not been able to get the funds that they need, and as a result, the WFP has had to cut food vouchers for Rohingya refugees, and they're worried they might have to cut more going forward. How worried are you about that and what that could do to the situation in the camps?
Okay, so the cut to food ration is very set for me, not only for me but also for the whole of the Rohingya community, because the refugees here don't have any livelihood. They don't have any facilities and opportunities to make money. Most of the refugees rely on WFP ration, on UN ration. So already most of the refugees are not getting enough food to survive. But this time the UN is cutting the rations again. This make me very, feel very bad as a refugee, because, for me, this is not enough. But not for me, but for the whole community, this is not enough. So I have been talking with so many of the refugees. They always express their, feeling that what will we do if the ration cut out to us? Because we don't have any income source here. We don't have any sources to make money. So where will we buy the ration if the limited rations run out? Cutting out the ration is, is impacting for everything, like health and mentally sickness. Also, other kind of is impacting for everything for the refugees.
All right, that's Yasin Abdumonab in Cox's Bazaar. He's a photojournalist and also a Rohingya refugee. Yasin, thank you so much for joining us on Inside Story. We really appreciate it.
Always my pleasure.
All right, let's recap how the Rohingya ended up in Bangladesh in the first place. A crackdown by Myanmar security forces in 2017 targeted the mainly Muslim Rohingya in Rakhine State. More than 1 million people escaped to neighboring Bangladesh. The Rohingya are in a legal limbo and are effectively stateless. They're denied citizenship in Myanmar, and those in Bangladesh don't have refugee status. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our panel now. In Cox's Bazaar, Razia Sultana, founder of RW Welfare Society, a women's rights organization. At an undisclosed location on the Thailand-Myanmar border is Matthew Smith, chief executive and co-founder of Fortify Rights, a human rights organization. And also in Cox's Bazaar, Regina de la Portilla, UNHCR communications officer for Cox's Bazaar. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Razia, let me start with you today. I have heard you say in the past that no refugee camp is a life for people. It's like a detention. How difficult is life for Rohingya refugees in these camps, and how much worse has it gotten these past few years?
They are not stateless. They have their own land. Rohingya have their own land, and this is the Rakhine state. And this is the 5 years. The Rohingya are now in Cox's Bazaar, and there is no change. And day by day, everyone know the situation become worse. And recently, you see the fire incident. But before the COVID, the people expecting about the repatriation, but after the coup, it's almost finished, their hope. And in Bangladesh, I can say they just live like an animal for me, because there is no education, no proper any skill development, no proper programs. How can they develop their life? Even the issue about the livelihood.
Matthew, you heard Razia there talk about the fact that she doesn't like hearing the Rohingya called stateless because they are from Myanmar and belong in Myanmar. I want to ask you about that because a lot of your work has documented the fact that the Rohingya are denied citizenship by Myanmar. They are in this legal limbo. What has to happen in order for them to be able to get past that?
Well, Razia is absolutely correct. The Rohingya have an indigenous homeland in Rakhine State, Myanmar. I think significantly, since the coup in Myanmar, the national unity government that formed in opposition to the military junta has committed itself to resolving this issue, to recognizing Rohingya citizenship in the country. They need to do more to bring that to fruition. But right now, of course, the biggest problem facing the Rohingya in Myanmar is the military junta. But this is a long-standing issue. Governments, militaries in Myanmar's history, the last several decades, have denied the Rohingya people access to citizenship rights and all of the rights that come under it. And it is a fundamental problem. And until that problem is solved, along with a litany of other issues that have now been created by the Myanmar military regime in Myanmar, until these problems are solved, the struggle will continue.
Regina, we should point out first and foremost that no matter how long this crisis has been going on, the needs of Rohingya refugees remain urgent. I mean, this group is one of the most persecuted minorities in the world, and the situation only seems to be getting worse for them. The UN is now appealing for nearly $900 million in order to better help Rohingya refugees. But you've been coming up against funding shortfalls. How is this latest appeal going?
So indeed, I think the recent fire shows us that despite there being a lot of advancements in the last 6 years, this is still an emergency and it still requires humanitarian assistance. Most of the refugees in the camps are completely dependent on humanitarian assistance. meaning that we are launching this appeal because we need to cover all of the services, all of the basic rights, from food to health to protection to water and sanitation to education to nutrition. So it's a lot of things that we're calling for, and it's over 116 organizations, and more than half of them are local Bangladeshi NGOs responding. And indeed, the needs are still great, and we are facing a funding shortfall. It has to do with several things. We are seeing some of the donors stand by, but we also need to recognize that we need to change things. This cannot continue to be business as usual. So on one side, we need to prioritize, we need to streamline, we need to see how we're going to support the most vulnerable, but we also need to start scaling up education and skill development and capacity development so that refugees access also some livelihood, so that they themselves can support each other, that they can be self-reliant, that their resilience is built, because it will depend on this, on the situation becoming more sustainable for them. And at the same time, it will prepare them for an eventual return once conditions allow them to return.
Razia, when we talk about this latest fire that happened, we have to talk about the trauma that's been encountered yet again by Rohingya refugees who suffered because of that fire and were impacted because of that fire. You've been dedicating yourself these last several years to providing psychosocial support, especially for Rohingya women in the camps. The level of trauma that women refugees have experienced is shocking. It's horrifying. I've interviewed many Rohingya women over the years who were raped by members of Myanmar's military, many who saw their children killed before their eyes. Are Rohingya refugees able to get the kind of psychological support that they need?
Each of every Rohingya are traumatized, and every day they are facing the problem. And it's not only after the influx, but every day. Look at this fire today. But this fire, not only the fire, there are so many things happen every day in camp, and what makes them traumatized every day. Even the food, when the food cut, they also, desperate and frustrated. And this is also one kind of trauma because they say we are come here for life, even we are not getting life-saving food. So where we go? And we are not allowed to work. We are not allowed to say anything. What we should be here? Why?
Regina, I saw you nodding along to a lot of what Razia was saying there. It looked like you wanted to jump in, so please go ahead.
I think she's completely right. I mean, they live in a limbo where they don't know what is their future. They hope to return home, but they can't. And they live in this complete situation where they don't know what's happening, and all of a sudden they hear that their rations are being cut. And you can imagine, they live with $12 a month, it's being cut to $10 a month. That's nothing. One cannot even imagine and fathom this. And that is just one of the cuts that will affect everything. Their health will probably plummet a bit. We're also already talking about an anemic population, high levels of malnutrition. It can also lead to other negative coping mechanisms. We could even expect a rise in child marriage. So we are aware and we are worried about the situation. This is why we're calling for more support, sustained support. And we fear that if we don't get the funds, then we will have to make even more difficult choices that in turn will have an impact in the day-to-day lives of the Rohingya, which we already heard from Raw as well, how difficult it is to live in these conditions in an overcrowded camp, in bamboo and tarpaulin shelters, where you face maybe fires in the dry season, strong winds and rains that might wash away your shelter in the monsoon season. So there is a lot of work that we need to do to prevent this from escalating.
Matthew, one of the things I hear most often from the Rohingya refugees that I speak with, they ask, why are they not able to get justice for the atrocities that were committed against them? They say, we have documented this, we have shared evidence, we have spoken to prosecutors and investigators. Where is justice? I know that there are various cases that have been brought against Myanmar's military accusing it of the crime of genocide. There's a case that was brought at the International Court of Justice. There's also an investigation going on at the International Criminal Court. Your organization, Fortify Rights, recently filed a criminal complaint against Myanmar's military in Germany. What's different about that case, and how is it going? And why is it taking so long for these cases to play out?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mohammed. We at Fortify Rights, we share the frustration with the Rohingya community and others throughout Myanmar that the wheels of international justice move too slow. And certainly there are a great number of people trying to speed those wheels up. We have seen a number of cases crop up, as you mentioned. The case or the complaint rather that we filed in Germany in January this year, along with 16 individual complainants from Myanmar, including Rohingya and representatives from several other ethnic groups throughout the country, was filed under what's called universal jurisdiction. So this essentially enables perpetrators of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes to face prosecution in Germany, despite the fact that the crimes were committed outside of Germany's borders. So right now, we're hopeful that the federal prosecutor in Germany will launch an investigation. That's goal number one. Goal number two would, of course, be the issuance of arrest warrants, and then hopefully down the road, the not too distant future, prosecutions. But there are a number of other universal jurisdiction cases. There's a case in Argentina as well, and there's another effort in Turkey. And so this is part of what we hope will be a constellation of accountability mechanisms that will essentially encircle the Myanmar military regime, the junta. These are people that must be held accountable for these atrocious crimes. And I will just add as well that the Rohingya genocide and the atrocities that we're still seeing on a daily basis in Myanmar, they really do represent a historic challenge for the international community. Is the world going to sit by and watch? Or is the world going to act and act speedily? And we are working towards the latter.
Razia, I know that you yourself have presented evidence to different bodies. You've spoken to the UN about what the Rohingya have faced. Are you hopeful that there will be some accountability going forward, or are you frustrated that it is taking far too long?
I am frustrated, but in the meantime, I can say I always keep hope, because I see just now Matthew says we are now in the Germany the case file. So this thing sometimes make me hope, but frustrated because when I go in the field level, the situation makes me first. But when I come back home, when I'm reading and I'm analyzing, so then make me hope. Because of everyone is now with not only the Rohingya genocide, but all the Myanmar situation, we are focusing and exposing everything. So I keep hope. And I believe if everyone will together will go forward, maybe we will find a solution. But in the meantime, we have to think about the Rohingya, especially their actual right. What is still not identified, even NEG and other, what about the NEC, but they are not recognized as an ethnic. So this thing is very important for us, because everyone is asking about the federal government, about democracy. Federal government cannot fulfill when you are not accepting the other ethnics. If other 134 will accept, why not the Rohingya? But Rohingya, the Aboriginal of the Rakhine state. What is the Rakhine state? The new name, but it is the Arakan. So we are indigenous.
Regina, let me ask you about another dimension to the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh, something that I've heard a lot of concern about from Rohingya refugees the past few years. Over the course of the past few years, Bangladesh has transferred, I think it's around 30,000 Rohingya refugees to Bhasan Char. That's a remote island in the Bay of Bengal. There's a lot of rights groups that have expressed concern about conditions there. Bangladesh's government has said that transfers are only on a voluntary basis. The conditions are good. Does UNHCR have a presence there? And what has the assessment of those conditions been on Bhasan Char?
Yes, so last year in October, the UN, signed by UNHCR, we signed a memorandum to support the government-led response on Bhasan Char and to help them scale up the services. We were getting calls from Rohingya who were already on the island, who are asking us to come to the island to provide further support in terms of services. So since the end of last year, we have been scaling up services, mainly focusing initially on food, on health, on wash, on education, on support overall in the basic services. And so we now have a presence on Basan. We have a team that works there, and then we have missions that go often depending on the needs that we identify on the island. The conditions, it's different than in the camps in the sense that instead of bamboo and tarpaulin shelters, it's stronger structures. So there's a bit more of a housing situation within the island. The refugees feel safe, they can move freely. It is a different situation in the sense that we also see more skill development projects and livelihood projects in contrast to what we see in the Coxs Bazaar camps. But at the same time, it is isolated. And we have repeatedly said that the sustainability of the project depends on the government ensuring that the connectivity with the island and the mainland is enhanced, that refugees can go back and forth to visit families for medical purposes, maybe for other purposes as well. And this needs to be strengthened and enhanced. This is currently not at where it should be to make this project sustainable.
Matthew, I want to get back for a moment to the issue of international justice and accountability. There are many rights groups that have called on the UN Security Council to refer the abuses committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. Is that simply not happening because of Russia and China? Is that the main impediment here?
It certainly is, and it has been for a very long time. And it's worth mentioning as well that it's not even a veto at the Security Council that we've encountered, and that's been an obstacle. It's more the threat of a veto, and so we've been advising Security Council member states to put forward a resolution that would not only call for the situation in Myanmar and for the Rohingya situation to be referred to the International Criminal Court, but it would also mandate a global arms embargo. There's been resistance to advance a resolution in that regard. We do hope member states will move forward with that. But if I may, Mohammed, I just want to comment briefly on the situation in the camps in Bangladesh. The situation in the camps, as well as the situation on Basan Char, in our view, really constitutes a situation of mass arbitrary detention. We have to call it what it is. This is a community of people whose human potential is being completely swallowed by these violations that they're facing on a daily basis. So the justice and accountability will be a big part of that. But the government of Bangladesh can make some very quick movements right now to address some of these issues with regard to the right to work, with regard to freedom of movement and other human rights.
Matthew, let me just quickly follow up with you. We only have a couple of minutes left, but let me just ask you with regard to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. They've been criticized in the past for failing to respond effectively to the Rohingya crisis. Do you think we're going to see them do more? And what kind of role can they play when it comes to what's going on in Myanmar?
ASEAN has been largely ineffective and arguably part of the problem with regard to the atrocities in Myanmar and the Rohingya situation, whether it's a failure to push for justice and accountability, or whether it's authorities in ASEAN states participating in Rohingya, the human trafficking of Rohingya, which we've documented at length. And so there are some glimmers of hope. Malaysia has certainly found its voice with regard to calling for justice and accountability and advocating for the rights of the Rohingya and all the people of Myanmar. Indonesia is the chair right now of ASEAN, and so we are hopeful that Indonesia will be able to move that bloc a little bit closer to a more respectable position with regard to human rights. Right now, the way that ASEAN is dealing with the military junta in Myanmar and the way that ASEAN has dealt with the Rohingya genocide and other mass atrocity crimes happening right in its neighborhood is really, it's indicative of this bloc's inability or unwillingness, rather, to address these issues. It really needs to change.
Regina, there are so many crises going on simultaneously in the world right now. I mean, the Ukraine war being just one of them. How difficult does all that make it for you and your colleagues to ensure that the Rohingya get the attention that they need? Because so many of the refugees I speak with say they just feel that the world continues to ignore them.
Indeed, it is a great challenge that we are facing, and there's a crisis everywhere. And we just saw it with the earthquake in Syria and Turkey. It's something new, and they will also need support. So we are thinking differently, and we need to do that fast. So we are tapping into new funds, looking into development funds, looking to work with new partners like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank. But also we need to start thinking about the private sector. And we have a very nice project here now where we are providing women who are heads of households, who are widows, who were maybe mostly sustaining their family on their own, with skill development and with access to livelihoods, in the sense that they're learning to sew, they're producing sanitary napkins. And this project is now funded by Fast Retailing, a Japanese company. And this makes it easier to find funding. If we can scale up the skill development projects and access to livelihoods, which would benefit everyone, including in particular the refugees, then we can also tap into private funding. And this will be very important because we need to diversify as we see that other crises are coming up.
All right, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Razia Sultana, Matthew Smith, and Regina de la Portilla. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.